be learning about reflections of functions. So this is the original function that I'm starting off with, and we're going to start by making a table of values for the important points of this function. So the first point I'm going to use is the starting point right here, which it has an x value of -9 and a y value of -6. So from here the graph is increasing, and the next important point is where it changes from increasing to constant. So this is the next point I'm going to plot. This is an x value of -5 and a y value of 8. Now the graph stays constant up until the next point, which is right here. That's our next important point. This is a y value of x value of -2, y value of 8. And now the graph is decreasing until this point, which is our next important point, which is an x value of 4, y value of -4. And now the graph is increasing all the way until the very end. So our last important point has an x value of 10, y value of 2. So these are the 5 important points we're going to be using to reflect. So the first reflection we're going to do is reflecting across the y-axis, which is our vertical axis right here. So if we're reflecting across the y-axis, we're reflecting anything from the left side of the graph to the right side, and from the right side to the left. So if we think about it, what we're really changing here is if you have a point that's starting off at x equals 6, and you flip it across your y-axis, now it becomes x equals -6, right? And if you start off at the -6 and flip it across, now it's going to be a +6. So we're just changing the sign of our x value. Our y value isn't going to change at all. Another way of writing this is that we're plugging in -x for x, because we're just changing the sign of our x's. So if we look at our table of values here, we're changing the sign of all of the x's, and our y's aren't going to change at all. So if we have a -9, if we change the sign, it becomes a +9. Our y is still -6. If we change the sign of -5, it becomes a +5. Our y is still 8. -2 becomes a +2. Y again is still 8. 4 becomes a -4 because we're changing the sign. And our y value is still -4. And our 10 becomes a -10. Again, our y value doesn't change. So these are the new points I'm going to plot on my graph. So let's start off with our first one. Our x is 9. Y is -6. So here's my first point right here. My next point is x is 5. And my y is 8. And that's my second point, and I'm going to connect these 2 points together, and this is going to give me this first part of my graph right here. So I've just flipped across this first part of my graph across the y-axis. My next point is 2, 8, which is this point. Again, we're going to connect it, and there's the constant part of my graph, so far looks like it's working. My next point is -4, so -4 on my x, -4 on my y. Again, I'm connecting it to the last point, which looks like this section of my graph. Last point is -10, -2, or -10, +2. -10 on my x, +2 on my y. Again, I'm going to connect those together, and now what I have is a reflection of my original graph across the y-axis. Okay. The next thing I'm going to graph now is the reflection across the x-axis, and so this time we're reflecting across the horizontal axis, the one down here. If we were reflecting across the horizontal axis, now what's happening is whatever was above the x-axis is now going to be below it, whatever was below is going to be flipped above. So now we're changing our y value. So if our y value used to be 10, and we flip it, now it's going to be -10. If it used to be -10, it's going to be 10. So what we're changing now is the sign of our y value. X stays the same. If we're changing the sign of the y value, the negative is going to go outside of the f of x, because you're changing the y, which is f of x. So again, we're going to start off with the original points, so not this one, the original points up here, and we're only going to change the sign of our y value. So right now we have a -9, that still stays the same because your x's don't change. -6 becomes a +6. -5 stays the same. This +8 is becoming a -8. Negative 2 stays the same. This positive 8 becomes a negative 8. 4 stays the same, but negative 4 changes to become a positive 4. 10 stays the same, but 2 becomes a negative 2. So we're just changing all the signs of our y in values. So let's plot these. So we have a negative 9 and 6 is our first point. So x is negative 9, 6 is our y. That's my first point right there. Negative 5 is my x value, negative 8 is my y value, which is this point right here. And we're going to connect these two. So now this is this part of my graph. This first section flipped across the x. My next one is negative 2, negative 8. So negative 2 is my x, negative 8 is my y. And that's that constant part of the graph. Again, flipped across the x. I have a positive 4, positive 4. Again, connect those. My last point is 10, negative 2. So 10 is my x, y is negative 2. Connect those. And I end up with a graph that looks like it's been flipped across the x-axis. Perfect. Okay, so let's look at our next reflection here. We have a reflection across the origin. So the origin is the middle of the graph, 0, 0 point. So what I'm doing is flipping it across the origin. So if you have a point on your x-axis, it would just flip directly across to the other side of your x-axis. So we know our x's are going to be changing from positive to negative. If you had a point on your y-axis, it would be reflecting across like this to from positive to negative as well. If you had a point on this side, it would be reflecting over here where now they're both negative. So really in the origin reflection, you're changing both your x and your y. So you're changing the signs of both. So let's look at, again, our original points, which are these right here, our original table. So our negative 9 changes to a positive 9, negative 6 changes to a positive 6, negative 5 changes to a positive 5, 8 becomes negative. So we're changing the sign of everything. If it was positive, it's now negative. If it was negative, it's now positive. Negative 2 becomes positive, positive 8 becomes negative. Positive 4 becomes a negative, negative 4 becomes positive, positive 10 becomes negative, positive 2 becomes negative. So these are the new points that I'm going to be plotting to graph a reflection through the origin. So let's start off with 9, 6. So if 9 is my original function, or my x, and my y is 6, here's my first point right there. Now I have 5, negative 8. So 5 is my x value. Negative 8 is my y value. It's right here. Connect them. 2, comma, negative 8. So there's that first section of my graph again. And negative 4, positive 4. And then negative 2, negative 2. Or negative 10, negative 2. Alright, so here's my graph. So this is a reflection through the origin. So you can see it looks similar to this one, but really it's been flipped across the origin. So every single point has been flipped across the origin. And this is as if you had both an x and a y-axis reflection. So it's both of those together. Our last reflection is a reflection across the line y equals x. The line y equals x is just the linear line that looks like this. I'm going to draw it dotted. Here's my y equals x line. So what I want to do is reflect everything across this point, or this line. So if I had a point and I was reflecting it across this line, so let's say if you have a point right here, and I reflect it across it, it'll end up right there. So really what happens is if I start off with a point 6, 0, I flip it up here, it ends up being 0, 6. So it goes from the x-axis to the y-axis. What's happening here is you're changing the place of x and y. So when you reflect across the line y equals x, you're switching the order of your x and your y. So for example, if you have this first point right here, negative 9, negative 6, If we reflect it across the line y equals x, it becomes -6, -9. -5, 8 becomes 8, -5. -2, 8 becomes 8, -2. 4, -4 becomes -4, 4. 10, 2 becomes 2 and 10. So we're just switching our x and our y for all your points. And now let's graph this. So we have -6 is our x, -9 is our y. This is my first point. I have 8 is my x, -5 is my y. And I'm going to connect those. So now this is the first section of my graph. X is 8, y is -2. Here's that constant part that now is going vertically instead of horizontally. I have -4 is my x, y is +4. Connect those. And then 2 is my x, 10 is my y. And so as you can see, now my graph is kind of sideways of what it used to be before. It's been reflected across the line y equals x. So these are the 4 reflections you need to know. If you reflect it across your y-axis, the x changes signs. If you reflect it across your x-axis, the y changes sign. You reflect it across the origin, they both change signs. And if you reflect it across the line y equals x, they change places, so your x and your y switch.